And now for our last installment in the Leading Ladies of the Word video series, in which we're covering the ladies of the Bible who did have leadership roles. I wanted to end our New Testament section by focusing on a woman named Junia. So Junia is only listed in the end of the book of the letter of the Romans, or to the Romans. And it's an important list because there's a lot of women listed here as being active parts of the church. William Witt says in his book Icons of Christ that in this list, Paul describes women as deacons, patrons, or leaders, apostles, co-workers, and hard workers. So they're given all the different roles in the church. Pretty much all the roles are listed there. James Dunn says in his commentary on Romans, he says, so far as this list is concerned, Paul attributes leading roles to more women than men in the church addressed. So let's look at Junia. I don't know which one she is in that artwork, but we're going to look at Junia now for a few minutes. The text is simply as follows. Romans 16:7, Paul says, greet Andronicus and Junia, my fellow Jews who have been in prison with me. They are outstanding among the apostles, and they were in Christ before I was. Now the Greek fathers were unanimous in understanding Junia to be a female apostle. The Latin fathers, as well as Latin translations, were also unanimous in recognizing that Junia was a woman who was notable among the apostles. Now, this might seem like a strange quote. Why am I spending time in this presentation to prove that Junia was a woman? The reason I have to do that is because there has been dispute about this. Some people dispute the fact that Junia is a woman, and some translations even have changed the name to Junius to make it more likely that this was a man, on the grounds that they do not believe that a woman could serve in the role of an apostle. But there's no manuscript evidence for this. The manuscript evidence says, and the study of ancient names declares, that Junia was indeed a woman, and she is called an apostle. It's very unfortunate that in the last bit of the relatively recent part of history, in church history, there's been an attempt to say that this was not actually a woman. William Witt also says it was only in the medieval period that scribes first introduced the form Junius based on the conviction that a woman could not have been an apostle. So for 1,300 years, Junia was a woman, and then translators started to say, well, this couldn't have been a woman because she's an apostle, and so they added a letter, added some ways of crafting this name to make her not a woman anymore. And I'm trying to think of Junia up in heaven, looking down on all this and saying, like, what are they doing to me? They're making me into a man. That is not what she would have wanted to see, I don't think. Richard Bauckham points out that the history of the matter is a sad story of prejudice making bad translations. So this medieval tendency to turn Junia into a man persisted in different translations. Even Luther translated it this way, so that until relatively recently, a lot of people just never realized that Paul referred to a woman apostle. William Witt says, all the evidence points to Junia being a woman, and there's none whatsoever for the male Junius. Consequently, in the last few decades, the majority of scholars have come to acknowledge that Junia was indeed a woman. So thankfully, the tide has finally turned on this, and most people are now becoming more aware of the fact that Junia is in fact a woman and that she is an apostle. But we once again get pushback, because now that it's pretty clear to everyone that Junia is indeed a woman, they have to come up with some other argument for how, for the fact that they don't think women should be in roles like apostle. And so, with the rising consensus, the shift has turned to the argument that the now recognized female Junia could not have been an apostle. Rather, the Greek should be translated not as outstanding among the apostles, but she was well known to the apostles. Her and her husband were just well known to the apostles. Well, there's just no really good argument for this. It's pleading at this point, because they recognize that they can't make the argument that she wasn't a woman. So instead, they'll change their argument to say that, well, she is a woman, but she wasn't an apostle. It means that she was just known to the apostles. There's just no good argument for this. It's just special pleading to avoid the reality of what Paul wrote. When Jews adopted Greek or Latin names. Now here's where we go another step. I want to go another step here in examining this woman, Junia. What else can we know about her? Well, Richard Bauckham, as he often does, explores this as far as the evidence could take us, and with some healthy speculation, some healthy theorizing, he comes up with a possible connection in the Bible. When Jews adopted Greek or Latin names, it was evidently quite common for them to choose names that sounded similar to Semitic names. This opens the way to the suggestion that the Junia of Romans 16:7 is the same person as Luke's Joanna. So let me explain a little bit what's going on here in this quote. As many of you probably know that are watching this, the Apostle Paul was actually Saul in his Hebraic name. But when he ministered out and about the Roman world, he took on the name Paul because it sounded similar to Saul, and it was a more common name amongst Roman people. And so we have Saul turning to Paul. It's not a name change, it's just a variation of the same name for a different environment. And what Richard Bauckham is here suggesting is that Junia is actually the Latinized version of the name Joanna. And this would be a possibility. And he's connecting Junia to Joanna, and Joanna is mentioned in the Gospel of Luke. In Luke chapter 8, verses 1 through 3, we looked at this earlier when we were talking about Mary Magdalene. It says, the 12 were with him, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household, and Susanna, and many others. So we learn about this woman named Joanna, who's the wife of Chuza, the manager of Herod's household. And this is interesting because she is a woman who is part of Jesus' entourage. She is one of the women followers of Jesus. She's the wife of Chuza, who's the manager of Herod's household. This means that she would have probably been a wealthier woman, which makes sense given the fact that later we're told that these women supported Jesus from their own means. She might have been the main support, as she was probably a relatively wealthy woman. And the other thing that we learn here is that she's connected to Herod's household in terms of her husband's employment. And so she would have probably had a lot of connection to politics, to Rome, to the city in Rome, city of Rome, to Latin speakers, to the elite part of society. So all of this is interesting. When we think about Luke's source, like how did Luke know about some of the things that went on in Herod's household? Joanna is probably his source. And so she plays an important role in informing Luke about some of the things that he wrote about in Luke and Acts. Richard Bauckham says, what is unprecedented in Joanna's case, however, is that she not only financed Jesus' mission, but herself joined his itinerant followers in their countercultural lifestyle. So he wants us to imagine this Joanna living nearby Herod's palace, Herod's place of residence, and as her husband worked with Herod, managed his household. And so Joanna grows up or lives in this environment of the elite, and she finds out about Jesus and maybe even is healed by Jesus, and she becomes a follower of Jesus. But whereas a lot of wealthy people, when they're impressed by somebody like this, they might just send money their way. She goes all in. She wants to follow Jesus around. She gives up her place of privilege and starts following around this guy that hangs out with the poor. And so she is really a remarkable woman. Bauckham says, the Christian message first reached the Jewish community in Rome when pilgrims visiting Jerusalem for the festivals heard it preached by the leaders of the Jerusalem church in the temple forecourt. But apostles from Jerusalem were needed, and Joanna and Chuza were an obvious choice. So what he's saying here is that after Pentecost, these people go back to Rome and they tell about the story of Jesus, and the church in Rome probably sent a message to the church in Jerusalem. We've heard this news about Jesus and the coming of the Spirit, and we've seen the evidence for it in the people who have come back to us. We need someone with authority on the life of Jesus to come and speak to us and lead us. And so what better couple than Joanna and her husband Chusa, if they are both Christians? We know Joanna is, but what better couple than this couple who already has a lot of knowledge about Roman culture and the Latin language? And so it's very possible, I think he's speculating here in a healthy way, that the church in Jerusalem might have sent somebody like Joanna to the church in Rome to be a leader there and an authoritative voice about Jesus' ministry. So there's some speculation involved there, but certainly it's interesting to point out that this Joanna, that was a follower of Jesus and a supporter of Jesus' ministry, would have been part of the early church, and on the day of Pentecost would have been filled with the Spirit, would have then been possibly sent to Rome to help lead the church there. And when Paul wrote a letter to the Roman church, he remarks about her as outstanding among the apostles. And he even says in that greeting in Romans 16 that she was a follower of Jesus before he was. So he recognizes that, and that makes sense if she is Joanna. And those names, of course, are very similar. And so I think it's pretty good speculation that Joanna is Junia. Further confirmation that Junia is a woman, by the way. And so Joanna is Junia. So here's a woman who followed Jesus, who was a witness to his resurrection, who was a designated apostle to the church in Rome, and I'm sure had a lot of leadership and authority in communicating the message of Jesus to the church in Rome. Now, one objection that could be raised is, well, how come it says in Romans that her husband is Andronicus? Well, it's possible that Chusa chose that name as his Greek or Latinized name as a missionary. We don't know. It could be that Chusa died and this was her second husband, or we don't really know what the possibilities are there, but there are possibilities. And so I think this is good historical speculation. And she would have been an important woman in both the church in Jerusalem and the church in Rome, and certainly a leading lady of the word.